Welcome to the Intentional Encourager podcast, where each episode brings you compelling conversations and stories designed to entertain, enlighten, and encourage. And now here's your host, Brian Sexton.
Hey everybody, Brian Sexton. You know what's really important to me when I do business with a company is trust and transparency. I've been telling you now for a good while about my buddy Damon Burton and his company, SEO National, because trust and transparency are just as important to them. You know, for the last 15 years, in the search engine optimization space, they have been leading the way and serving people tremendously well. Now, for those of you that don't know what SEO is, it stands for search engine optimization. It helps you show up higher on Google searches so that folks that are looking for what you have find you quicker. And you know what's really encouraging? More revenue, more sales, growing your business. Do me a favor, get in touch with Damon and his team today at SEO National at 855-736-6285 or go to SEOnational.com and get your free quote and tell them you heard it on the Intentional Encourager podcast. I hope you're ready, because here comes a dynamite conversation on the Intentional Encourager podcast. And welcome into the Intentional Encourager podcast. I'm your host, Brian Sexton. Thank you for joining us again today. I'm going to tell you a story from my guest today, Mark Sowersby. He has a story that is powerful, and he's also an author. He's written a book called Forgiving the Nightmare. We'll tell you how to get his book. If you're watching on YouTube, you can see his book in the background. But it is my honor to welcome, he's also a pastor as well, too. So this is close to my heart. As you guys know, my dad was a pastor the last 3.5 years of his life. I'm very purposeful about the ministry. And it's my honor to welcome Mark Sowersby to the Intentional Encourager podcast. Mark, how you doing?
I'm doing well. Thanks for having me on today.
I appreciate you coming on today. Let me start here. And I've started here, gosh, as we were setting up this time together, I sent you a link. I said, hey, check out the podcast because some people, when they come on the podcast, this format is a little bit different than most other formats, because I believe I don't want folks to witness an interrogation. I want them to be part of a conversation. Right. And so let me start here. For the last couple of years, obviously, we've gone through the COVID-19 pandemic in vastly different ways. I know, living in West Virginia, as I live in West Virginia, it's been different for us there, as it's probably been you living in Massachusetts. Share with me a lesson that you've learned from the last couple of years going through the pandemic, either personally, professionally. And once we get through this, I do believe, and I'm going to continue to I don't know how to quite say it. I'm going to continue to say it this way. I believe we're going to get out of this pandemic. I really do.
Amen. I agree with you.
I really think this is going to be over very soon. But what lesson have you learned that you'll take with you after this is all over?
Well, that's a great question. I thank you for asking me. I think there's 3 things that I've learned during this pandemic. I've kind of always known them, but they became really evident over the last couple of years while we've been dealing with this. First is to be content. You know, I've chased after many things in my life, but I think I had to be content with what I have, be happy with what I have and what I'm doing. Second, to be patient. Sometimes I'm the guy looking for the next thing, and I had to be patient and let things unfold and open up and go through processes. And then to celebrate our victories in inches, maybe instead of miles, if you would. I'd have to allow myself to celebrate the small things as much as allow myself to celebrate the big things. So those are the 3 things that I think I've taken away: is to be patient, is to be content, and to celebrate those things that the Lord has put in front of us, that faith helps us walk through. So those small things, a laugh of a child, a moment with a family, those things.
No, that's so good, Mark, because again, I think people lost sight of those small things. And I love what you said there about celebrating big and small things. And you and I were talking a little football before we got started. I'm a lifelong Cincinnati Bengals fan. This year, as a Bengals fan, we're celebrating going to the playoffs for the first time in 6 years. You, as a lifelong Patriots fan, they've had as many Super Bowls as the Bengals have had playoff appearances in the last 20 years. And so it's been vastly different. When you think about the word celebrating, because people celebrate differently.
Sure.
When you think about that, how do you celebrate big and small things? What does a celebration look like to you?
First, once you told everybody I'm a Patriot fan, you just lost half of your audience. No, I'm just teasing.
Well, it's with the other half. The other half left when I told them I was a lifelong Bengals fan. So,
well, that might be true. I don't know. Either they feel sympathy for you and anger towards me. I don't know. We did get rid of Tom
something.
Brady.
I will tell you this, and I want you to answer I want to
Sure,
get to that thought, but I'll tell you this. I told my son, who's a Green Bay Packers fan. I tried my best to raise him as a Bengals fan.
A house divided cannot stand.
I know that's right. Well, especially when the Packers visited Cincinnati this year, and it was a 3-point overtime win for the Pack. But I told my son this the other day. I said, you have all of your life that you've been rooting for the Packers. You've had that dude playing quarterback in Aaron Rodgers. You, as a Patriots fan, for the last 20 years before the last couple of years, had that dude playing quarterback. Arguably the greatest quarterback of all time in Tom Brady.
I would agree.
For the first time in a long time, and maybe, people will say Carson Palmer, maybe. But for me in my lifetime, that dude was Boomer Esiason.
Sure.
The legendary Bengals, Jets, Cardinals quarterback, now a television analyst. And I said, now for the first time in a long time, Bengals fans have that dude in Joe Burrow.
Sure.
That guy that when he trots out on the field, you're confident that, he's going to lead your team to a win. So that's a great place to jump back to what we were talking about just a minute ago in celebrating.
Sure.
Because again, you celebrate great wins. Losses hit you. Losses hit you differently.
They do.
How do you celebrate those big and small victories in your life?
Well, I think we just were, right? We were celebrating our teams. We were corresponding. We were talking about, we were reminiscing. We were throwing, we were celebrating. We were sharing life and an interest together. So I think that's one form of celebration. Being a man of faith, being a believer in the Lord, I believe there's a celebration before the Lord that's a shout and just a joyful celebration. But I think celebrations in all kinds of forms. Sometimes it's quiet and just really reflective. Sometimes it's loud and expressive. Sometimes it's conversational like we are now. So I don't think the format of how one celebrates is the biggest issue. It's that we find celebration in those moments. Again, those little things when a child looks at you or speaks to you, your own child just gives you the humbleness of being a parent again. And in those big moments where you and your wife overcome or pay off a bill or something like that, where those moments in life is a big celebration. But I think it's important to always celebrate the beauty, the hope, the love, the grace that's found in the Lord and how he pours it out before all of us.
Well, you just hit on something really, really great, Mark. And that is the moments of celebration, the birth of a child,
Sure.
a marriage, a promotion, those moments, when you watch your children do something athletically or academically,
Sure.
those moments, as we record this, a couple of weeks ago, we had Christmas and New Year's, and those are moments of celebration.
Sure.
And I want to see, I don't think, let me step in and for those, I'm going to step to the faith element of this for just a minute. And we'll because again, you don't have to be a Christian to understand the faith part of this. But, again, I think celebration is something that is hardwired into humans by God, our divine creator, to where there is just a euphoria, a joy, a and you can't help it because it's hardwired into your DNA.
I agree.
Even those people, and we will get into your story of what you overcame. Even at times when people are going through bouts of depression, bouts of fear, anxiety, all the different emotions we've seen in the last 2 years around this pandemic, we can still find reasons and things to celebrate. Now let's attack that from the faith element for just a minute. When you think about the things that you've overcome in your life and the victories that God has allowed you to have,
yes,
what type of celebration happens? Is it is it tears of joy? Is it euphoria? Because we celebrate in different ways. Some people, and you'll watch, and forgive me for the long-winded question.
No, please.
But
we'll
watch a sporting event, and a big victory moves people in different ways. Some people are moved to tears.
Sure.
Where they're just so emotional. Like if a player or something like that, all the hard work, or if they've overcome an injury, they're moved to tears because they get a chance to celebrate something they've overcome. And they're just so great. They're just so moved with gratitude that it comes out in waves of tears of joy, or just a breakdown, a joyful breakdown. Some people just jump and they're just exuberant and they're just, they go nuts. They go wild.
Sure.
They just don't know how to contain themselves. They are just overcome with joy. They're running around like a child, just skipping and laughing, and it comes in different waves. As you think about the things that you've overcome, which emotion in celebration hits you more? Is it the tears of joy, or is it the exuberance?
I'd have to say it's been all of the above. When you've overcome a situation like that, and that's what the story of Forgiving the Nightmare is. It's a journey. And in that journey, I celebrate the overcoming of what Christ has done in me, but each one has its own kind of nucleus, its own kind of story, its own kind of narrative. So there's moments in the journey that it's just been tears, where I have a revelation of a personal, then there's been times when it's been exciting and celebration with a shout. Naturally, I'm an extrovert. I tell my church I'm really close to being the guy who paints his body and goes to the Patriot game. I mean, I'm that kind of guy. But
nobody wants to see that out of me.
Yeah, nobody wants to see it. But in my head, I'm that guy, But so naturally, it's my personality. But in the journey that the Lord has brought me on through forgiveness, there have been moments where it has been public, and it's been a celebration with others, and then there's been the quiet revelation ones where it's been at the altar, and it's just been me and God has dropped a promise or a word in my heart. So, I think that I wish I could say it was always like this or like that, but I think just like any journey in life, there's different expressions of that joy. There's different expressions of that responsibility or that duty, if you would. So, it's been a journey, and there's been moments as I've gotten as high as I've gotten low. There's been moments where I've cried out of frustration and shook my hands to God and say, "Where are you?" And then there's moments where I've lifted my hands to God and say, "Thank you." So, that's the journey where celebration's been a big part of it, and realizing to celebrate everything that God has done, or we're all doing. I like how you said earlier that it's wired in us. I think when we think about the word of God, we remember what it tells us in Ecclesiastes, that there is a season for all men, a season unto heaven for all things. And there's a season to dance, a season to shout, a season to celebrate. So,
no, I love that, because again, and we've talked about the football metaphor.
Yeah.
A lot of teams, you don't pour the Gatorade bucket over the coach's head in the second quarter with 7 minutes to go.
No.
And you may be up by a field goal. That's not the time to celebrate. Nothing's been won yet. You may have the lead, but you don't have the victory.
That's true.
And there's a difference in having a lead and having a victory. And so again, I love what you said about the seasons of celebration. So let's step aside, take a break here real quick, because I want to leave room and space for Mark's story. And when we come back, we're going to talk about the book, Forgiving the Nightmare. I want to talk about the process. We're going to talk about the process of writing the book and kind of what you can expect when you get into it. My guest is author, pastor, Mark Sowersby, and he has got a dynamic conversation for us. Hang on, I'm telling you. Hang on. It's going to be good. But let's take a little break. We come back. We'll get into the process around his book, Forgiving the Nightmare. Mark Sowersby joins me on the Intentional Encourager podcast. You come back in just a moment. Hey everybody, Brian Sexton here. The new year is upon us, and you may be sitting there thinking, hey, I would really love to pay off some debt, or I would like to save for that dream vacation. Maybe you want to buy a new car, whatever it is you want to do financially in the coming year. Let me give you a great piece of intentional encouragement and something to think about that might help you do it. Products for Profit. Now, this is a course taught by my good friend Joe Hart, who's been a guest on the Intentional Encourager podcast and has told his story how reselling changed his life. And you know what, folks? It could do the same thing for you too. It's really simple. Reselling is basically buying a product and then reselling it online for more money. And Joe is going to take you through the steps and show you how to do this either part-time or maybe, as some of his students have done, take this full-time as well. Go to coachjoe89.gumroad.com/L/premium PFP. And oh, by the way, this group is going to help you find leads of products that are profitable right now, give you all kinds of great intentional encouragement, and you're going to be surrounded by a community of people that are going to want to see you be successful in the reselling game. Again, go to coachjoe89.gumroad.com/L/premium PFP and tell him you heard about it on the Intentional Encourager podcast. And now let's get back to more great conversation here on the Intentional Encourager podcast. Mark, let's talk about your book. And again, I wrote my first book in 2020, and I wrote it about the impact of my dad.
Amen.
And so you talk about in your book, and I want to save the story for the last segment. But for you, take me through the process. Was this your first book? Was it something you'd always wanted to do? Take me through the process of writing your book, Forgiving the Nightmare.
I'm happy to. It's quite the story. I'm a dyslexic by nature. That's a struggle I have. I see words backwards, inside and out, upside and down. And it's something I've struggled with my whole life. Education, academia was always the monster or the giant of my life. I was intimidated by it. I ran from it. I always felt insecure in front of it. And I did manage, by the grace of God, to go to a local Bible college, and by the love and the mercy of people, I was able to graduate with a BA degree. It was the longest 4 years of my life, graduating from that degree. But I'll tell you, God put in my heart that I would write this book. And I'll never forget where I was. I was on a team representing our school. We were praying in Canada one night. I was at an altar, as we do in our tradition, and people were coming down to the altar, and I was praying over them. And right there, the Lord put in my heart that I would write a book. And I kind of laughed, because here's this dyslexic that graduated high school at a third grade reading level. And I said, Lord, if I'm going to write a book, what are you going to call it? And there, as a young man, he put those words in my heart, Forgiving the Nightmare. I'm over 50 now, and I've wrestled with that to say, Lord, how will it come out of me? What would it look like? What does it sound like? What is this promise of forgiving the nightmare? And the Lord just placed again in my heart that I'd write a book. And I came to those pages with that same insecurity, that same fear. But by the grace of God, I was able to write it. And it took me probably 20 steps longer than it should have. But I poured my heart. Every word of the book was weighted with the grace and mercy. And I wrote the book to somebody like me, somebody who's been through some nightmares, some pains, some regrets, some hurts, some difficult times, but also somebody that may be struggling, with reading. I was always a guy who struggled with reading. You could hand me a volume of books and say, Mark, the answer's in these volumes. You just have to read it. I was too intimidated. I would have never read it. So I kind of wrote the book to a guy like me. It's an airplane book. It's a pit stop book. It's something that's a great read. It's not a long read. I like to think it's a deep read, but it's not a long read. That's how I because that's what I wanted.
Mark, you bring up a great point. Okay. And the point I would make off of that is the King James Bible was written or translated for, and a lot of people have said that prisoners, people incarcerated, have learned to read by reading a King James Bible because it was written at about a 5th or a 6th grade level.
Sure.
That's what people miss about, and that's my favorite translation of the Bible, is the King James Bible. And people go, well, I have a hard time getting through the these, thous, and eths, and begats and begotten. But again, you have to understand it's written, and you can like whatever translation you want to. I'm just saying, for me, I don't have a problem with the these and thous and ye's and things like that, because I know the simplicity of the translation it was written at. I'm like, okay, if I can't get through a translation written through a 5th grade level, I have a bachelor's and a master's degree, and so for me, it's like, well, if I can't get through that, what can I get through?
Sure.
In reading that. And so, yeah, I love that you talked about that. When did you know right away when that young man came to you with the title Forgiving? Did you know right away that was it, or did it have to marinate in your mind a little bit?
Well, the name Forgive was immediate. I knew that something, because I was having a long internal argument, conversation, prayer, whatever word you want to have. I was having it with the Lord, and I was so intimidated with academia. I mean, every day I spent in college, I was just felt like I was the least important person there. I'll never forget my first day of school. They handed me syllabi, what's required in the course. And I went back to my dorm room and cried because I never heard of a syllabi. See, I was in special ed. I was the guy in the small bus. I was that guy. And then I wrestled with my faith, with my walk with God. But I remember being in my early 20s, and really I felt impressed by the Holy Spirit, as we say in my circles. And to say,
so Mark, I got to jump in here. So,
sure.
you're a special ed student, as we say, special education student.
Yep.
All of your life.
All my life.
Academics has always been a challenge for you.
Oh,
so what prompted you to want to go to Bible college?
The Lord. Yeah, it's, I really believe that through the Spirit of the Lord speaking to my heart, encouraging me through my pastors, encouraging me through the word that I could read a little bit of. I really felt like the Lord was saying, I'm calling you, choose this day whom you will serve. I've called you and I'll make a way. So I had to step out in faith. I was in my early 20s. I stepped out and I signed up for the local Bible college. And I actually talk about that in the book, and how the day I got there, I went to visit the dean, and I thought he would reject me because I'm a special ed student. And he got up from his desk and he introduced me to a woman that got there several weeks earlier than I did, just to tell me she got there to start a learning center. And I was her first student in the learning center. And she was a gift to me. She taught me how to be a student. She taught me how to study. She didn't put me in a category. She didn't just hold me down. She allowed me. Now I needed help. I needed a lot of help. I had to take some reading courses and things like that.
Yeah.
But she gave me a lot of help. So,
well, and I'll tell you this, for me, I never considered Bible college because I wasn't a preacher. I grew up Pentecostal. I grew up apostolic Pentecostal, still am apostolic Pentecostal. And so for me, I knew people that were going to Bible college. People would kind of talk to me like, hey, you want to think about Bible college? I'm like, nah, I'm going to Marshall. It's 10 minutes from the house. I want to be a sports writer, believe it or not. I wanted to be a sports writer. I started out being a broadcast journalism major. And I thought, well, I want to be the voice of somebody, and then switch to journalism and then ultimately to marketing. But I never had that desire because I had other people telling me, you should go to Bible college. You're going to be a preacher.
I didn't get the call to preach in my own life till I was 39 or 40 years old. And I'll be 50 in August. And so it came to me late in life. For you, what was that drive and desire for you to want to go to Bible college?
Well, I think the only healthy part of my life, as we say in our circles, I'm a Pentecostal, I'm an Assembly of God guy. So I grew up in the Assembly of God. The Assembly of God was a church that opened up their arms to me. So here's this broken 16-year-old kid that just lived 7 years of child abuse of every form and every shape in my life. And I stumble into this youth group. And I think that's the first time I saw healthy people, not perfect people, not by far, but healthy people that showed me nucleus of health and love and grace. And I think out of that, some of the best examples in my life were my pastors or the leaders of my church, and they inspired me. Obviously, I'd have to say that is the call of the Lord. Somebody told me a long time ago, nobody goes into the ministry unless they're called or crazy.
Yeah.
And I had to be a
great
call.
point.
So it was the calling of the Lord. And people go, well, how did you know? It was that still small voice. It was that quickening in my spirit. It was that I'll step out in faith. And that's
what it was for me. I had a guy that came to our church. We had a man, he was probably in his early 70s, and he had a prophetic ministry. And it was a Monday night, and I just happened to be home that week because I traveled. I covered 6 states in the South, and my pastor said, "Are you going to be home?" I said, "As a matter of fact, yeah, I am. I'm going to be home this week." He said, "Good. You're tomorrow night. You're playing keyboard." Okay, I'll be here. And it was this man that looked at me. I'll never forget it. I'm sitting there at our keyboard, and he goes, "You're running from the call of God on your life." I hadn't talked to him about feeling the calling of God on my life to preach or anything like that. But he knew, obviously the Lord kind of dropped it, kind of like that, not necessarily just like that, kind of that Damascus Road moment when the Lord just drops a big, spotlights on you. And again, so I understand that, a lot of people, and I've said this, Mark, and I don't want to veer off too far.
No, it's okay.
But I feel like a lot of people in ministry, and I may make somebody mad that hears this, but I don't really care. It feels like in a lot of places that we've turned a calling into a vocation.
That's true.
So it's, because, and especially in the organization that I'm in, again, I may offend somebody. I'm sorry you're offended, but this is what I believe, is that we've had a lot of generational churches to where the grandfather started the church, handed it off to his son, who pastored for 25, 30 years. He handed it off to his son. And the one person they never consulted in the transition was God. It was kind of like a business, right? You're going to take over the business, and then your son's going to take over the business, and your son's going to take over the business. And it almost feels like in a lot of cases, and I'm not saying all cases,
no,
there are a lot of times where it's the will of God for that father to hand it to his son and ultimately to go to the grandson. Okay. But there's a lot of cases where it's not, and it's treated like a family business. It's like, okay, we built this church and it's going to stay in our family, and that's the way it's going to be. And nobody else is going to pastor this church except our family. And there's something wrong with that. It's like, did you ever consult God about it? Did you ask the Lord what he thought? And so I didn't mean to go off on a tangent there.
No, it's fine.
What you said about the examples of your life being youth pastor, it really seems like, as you're telling that story, that those men were walking in a calling and not a vocation.
Oh, of course.
Was that the kind of example that you had that birthed that desire in you to pursue the ministry?
Sure. Yeah, that's exactly what it was. Honest, genuine, again, not perfect people, but genuine people. That the call is what you'd go after. The call keeps you, the call leads you, the call has always been before you. And, I love that you shared that testimony about that man who came and how you said he dropped it in his heart. But I would say it was been in your heart far, far longer than it was in his. And he just confirmed it was in your heart. And he spoke, helped you say, yeah, God knows. And I really love how you said that. And as far as picking the next leader, we look at Jesse, right? Saul comes to Jesse and says, hey, I'm here to anoint the next king. And Jesse brings everybody out but David, because it can't be that guy. He's the little one. He's the
well,
young
everybody thought the firstborn should always have it always started with the firstborn in the Old Testament, because that's the way it had always been. It was the way it was always, it was like Jacob with Reuben.
Yeah, exactly.
It was Isaac with Esau. And so go ahead, Mark.
I just read a quote the other day that said, my whole life, they've tried to teach me how to be a leader. I've gone to seminars, I've read books, I've seen videos on how to be a leader, but the Bible just teaches me how to be a servant. And I think that's a powerful statement. Now, I understand about leading organizations, leading processes and ministries. I understand that. You can't be a fool about those things. But I think individually, it all starts by being a servant to the Most High. And in our servanthood is where we learn to lead. Jesus says that where we are weak, he is strong. And I think that's what, again, my story is about. I've been weak in many, many things, but he has been strong in my life.
This is a perfect place to jump off and get into your story. So let's step aside, take another break. Man, I love how this conversation is going. I didn't intend, listen, folks, I did not intend, you might say, well, if I wanted to turn on to a religious broadcast, I'd turn on some preaching or something like it, whatever. I'm just not doing that in the best West Virginia voice I can do it in. Listen, I'm not going to apologize for being who I am. And I'm not going to apologize for having my guest be who he is. And so, but again, there's a lot of practicality in ministry and things like that. And I love what Mark left us with, leading by serving. But let's get to Mark's story. The real reason I've got him on, I've got speaker, author, pastor, Mark Sowersby, joining me on the Intentional Encourager podcast. You are going to want to come back, so don't go anywhere. We're back in just a moment here on the Intentional Encourager podcast.
Hey everybody, Brian Sexton. I want to take a moment and tell you about my friend Harry Spate and his new book, Selling with Dignity. Harry has taken an age-old concept of sales and he's put a new twist to it, and I love the direction that he's taken with Selling with Dignity. And here's what's encouraging about Harry's book. Instead of viewing people as numbers and machines, salespeople are now given the tools and the encouragement to be dignified in their approach. Here's what Harry says. He says, selling is an honorable profession when it's done right. When sellers feel they are valuable and have integrity and respect, this opens the door for better conversations and eventually relationship. This book puts an end to sleazy sales tactics and proves why selling with dignity can be done, and it leads to massive success. And I couldn't agree more. Go to sellingwithdignity.com, get your copy today, and if you want Harry to sign it, he'll do that for you. Again, go to sellingwithdignity.com and pick up your copy today of the new book by Harry Spate, Selling with Dignity. And now let's get back to more great conversation here on the Intentional Encourager podcast.
Mark, let's dive into your story. Your book, Forgiving the Nightmare. I want to step aside, let you take us through this journey. I may jump in with some questions, but please take us through. And I'll set this up this way. Mark shares in his book how he overcame years of horrific abuse during his childhood. Take us through your story.
Well, I first want to say that I wrote this book because I think everybody has a nightmare. My nightmare, as you said, was child abuse. You're right. I was abused from the ages I was 7 to 14 in every way, shape, and form that one could think of. I was sold by men to be abused by other men. I was burned. I was cut. I was abused. I was raped. I was beaten. I was neglected. I was forgotten. And those leave scars. Your body heals, but those leave scars of insecurities and fears. And and just a bunch of junk in one's life, and it can last a lifetime. And so when I penned my book, I said, you know what? Everybody has a nightmare. It may not all be abuse, and I hope it's not, but everybody in some way, shape, or form has had to overcome, has had to learn to forgive something, somebody, or some situation. So that was my heart, to say, not to glorify my past or say, oh, this is the only way. No matter what it is, I know there's pain and sorrow in people's lives. So the journey of forgiving a nightmare is more about forgiving than it is the nightmare. I mentioned the nightmare probably just to kind of show that, hey, I went through something too, but that's not the story.
Well, here's the thing, Mark, here's the thing, and forgive me, I said I wasn't going to jump in, but
okay. That's all right.
I had to jump in there. There are people in ministry that would say, man, why are you telling your story? You don't need to talk about that. You need to let that stay under the blood. So, and I'm going to use a term that we use in the church. Well, you need,
come on, brother.
That
Preach
just
it.
needs
Amen,
to
brother.
stay under the blood, brother. But again, I believe God uses these things to connect somebody that is still dealing with that thing, because we know how the enemy works. When we talk about the enemy, we're talking about Satan.
Amen.
Satan will use your past against you to destroy you, because abuse can be a destructive thing if not either by the grace of God you get delivered from it, or something happens where you're able to set it aside and move forward. Did you ever have somebody tell you, don't tell your story because it's too personal? How can a man of God stand or tell the story that you were child abused? Did you have somebody tell you not to write your book or tell your story?
Well, I definitely have come across that pattern of thinking. I've definitely come across that kind of concept where, you're new man, you're new creation, brother. You're under the blood. The old is gone, new has come. And again, I think that my story will always be a part of me. I can't deny that I was abused. I can't deny that those things happened to me. They've never gone away. That happened. It was a part of my story, a part of my narrative. And I think I wouldn't be honest with myself. Now, I know God is greater and he's bigger, but I cannot deny those things happen. I would say, whatever way you need to get help, if it's at the altar, if it's with a therapist, if it's with a coach, a counselor, those are all great sources. And however one finds a way to get help, please do. God can use it all.
Yeah.
I would say in my life, being a Pentecostal preacher, I've seen many people come to the altar and they want the Holy Ghost zap. You know it, brother. They want that moment where it all goes away. And maybe I searched for that moment. And one day I realized it wasn't going away. That I could still, even today, speaking to you, I still remember the pain, the hurt, the lies, the rejection. But what happened in my life, that mountain of sorrow, that mountain of pain and hurt was so big, and it cast out a shadow over everything I did. When God became bigger, that's what happened. The other mountain didn't go away. That mountain didn't go away, but God became bigger than the sorrow. God became bigger than the hurt. God became bigger than the pain. That doesn't mean the pains never shows up. It doesn't mean the sorrow never shows up or the anger never shows up. It means that mountain isn't overshadowing me anymore because God is bigger than all that. And that is the promise I live in.
How would Pastor Mark minister to 14-year-old Mark as a young man? Because I was never abused as a child, and you've walked through that. And I know people that before they came to God, they had some terrible things happen in their life.
Sure.
Have you ever thought about how you would now, if you were a youth minister, and 14-year-old Mark Sowersby walked into your church?
Sure.
How would you minister to him?
Well, I think I would try to do the best I can, be honest, be compassionate, be listening, tell him it's okay. It's not his fault. Let him know that there's resources and people there to help, advocacies and different organizations there to come beside. I like to tell people in my personal story, I think I came from one of the last generations where it was still this stuff was behind closed doors. I think it was the mid 70s to the early 80s, and the advocacy that and the awareness and the people that were willing to help, as wonderful it is today, there wasn't as much of it then. I'm not saying it wasn't there, but it wasn't as much. And I think I came from that generation. It was like, well, things happen behind closed doors and we keep behind closed doors. And unfortunately, it allowed abuses to be greater than it should be. And I think I came from that last group. Now there's so much support for those. But again, the broken person doesn't know where to find that support. The broken person doesn't know that that support's there for them. The broken person's afraid of that support. Are you just going to hurt me again? So I think if somebody came in, I try to plug them in and walk with them, not only spiritually with prayer and the God of Word, but with the practical side, with advocacy and counseling.
How did you, as an adult, did you ever, as an adult, get the opportunity to confront your abusers?
I did.
If so, how did you handle that situation? Because again, you this happens to you from 7 to 14. Obviously, physically, you changed a lot.
Sure.
And now you're an adult. And Mark, the reason I asked that question is I'm thinking, okay, 14-year-old me and 24-year-old me were two totally different people.
Sure.
I looked like an offensive lineman when I was 24. I was about 330 pounds when I was 24. I would have sat on somebody's head and I would have probably choked somebody out if that had happened to me. And I would have been like, listen, you did this to me when I was a kid. I ain't a kid anymore. I'm going to choke you out. That would be the temptation of my heart, because physically you're so imposing. You know, I had people not and you'd ask my wife, she's like, he can't fight worth a flip. But it looked like, I mean, I wear my Marshall class ring, and back then people thought on my bigger hand that I was an offensive lineman, you know, that I played offensive line at Marshall in college. And, you know, they would say, you know, man, you're so, you know, and I know if that had happened to me, I would have just been like, man alive, you know, you're going to pay for this. You said you got a chance to confront or maybe confront's a strong word, but how did you deal with those people as an adult that abused you as a child?
Well, I think a couple of things you said there are really interesting to me. How you talked about the 14-year-old of you and the 24. Not only did you grow physically, but you also probably had a different kind of structure emotionally, spiritually, economically, and just psychologically that helped you become that 24-year-old man. Not only did you grow in stature, but you grew in wisdom, and you grew in just how you ration out. When somebody, in my case, when I was broken at 14, that brokenness at 7 years old to 14, that brokenness stayed with me. So even though my body grew, even though my physical structure grew, and I'm not as tall as you, you know, on a good day, I'm hitting 5'6". So, you know, but I still was broken in the other parts. I still wasn't, you know, I was still broken psychologically. I was still broken emotionally. I was still carrying a lot of wounds from the past. So I think when I finally was able to confront my abuser for, you know, I think that's probably a little bit, you know, I thought like you, what am I going to do? Am I going to hit? Am I going to yell? Am I going to cry? Am I going to scream? Well, my abuser is handicapped. My abuser's in a wheelchair. My abuser now is bedridden. My abuser, you know, and I'd have to say that I felt pity. I felt pity upon my abuser that day. I wanted to feel righteous. I wanted to say, ha, 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 you deserve
Look
this.
what you got. Yeah, exactly.
But I didn't. I felt, you know, I didn't feel love. I didn't feel, you know, acceptance. Let me make sure I clear that. But I felt pity. I felt pity for that person. Like, wow, this is what this is what you sowed, and this is what you're reaping. And the sorrow of life, the hurts of life, the rejection of life, and that's kind of what I felt.
Did your family know what was happening to you, what was going on with the abuse, or was it, because you said, man, in the 70s and early 80s, it was kind of behind closed doors. Did your family know what was going on?
My mother did. My siblings did not learn until later on. My mother did, because it was my mother's husband that actually abused me. My mother, and I talk about her in my book, how she wrestled with her own insecurities and fears and abuses in her life. So by the time my abuses began, she was just probably unable to be able to even fathom something like that. So she dealt with them in an unhealthy way. I'll say that. But she did know. But as far as my siblings and my extended family, they did not know. And the day it stopped in my life was the day I actually told an extended family. I actually talked about that. I told my uncle. And I'll say the day my uncle, who we lost several years ago to cancer, he became my defender. And it was the first time I had somebody defend me. And it wasn't so much with a fist or a bat or with that, but it was a defender of somebody who stood up for me, somebody who believed me, somebody that was going to make sure it stopped. So at 14 years old, broken kid, not knowing which way to go up, immature, kind of confused in life, not knowing where to go. My uncle said, okay, it stops today. And it stopped. And I ended up spending a few years living with my uncle after that. And my life got better. I was born from an affair. My mother had an affair with my father, and I didn't meet my natural father till I was 45. And I tell people that it was the right time in life to meet my birth father, because before that, I think I would have been angry. Where were you? If you were in my life, maybe this wouldn't happen. What happened? Why did you not come around? And those are all real and genuine statements. But I would say that when I met him, it was the right time in my life. I was older. I made enough of my own mistakes. I didn't need him to be daddy because I already had Abba Father. I didn't need a daddy. I just wanted to know him. I wanted to know, what kind of sicknesses he had go through him, or what kind of life. I really wanted to know, was he bald? I'll be honest with you. That's what I wanted to know. And he wasn't. So, me and my father got to know each other for about 5 years before his passing. And
wow.
It wasn't warm and fuzzy, but it was a text during a football game. It was a text during baseball. And at least I had a relationship and found out there's potential diabetes in my family and so forth. And so on.
Mark, let me ask you this.
Sure.
I want to go here for just a second. And that is, do you find yourself now, with what you went through, are you a more overprotective father because of going through that? And the reason I say that is I've talked to people that have gone through abuse like that. And they say, when I had kids, I had flashbacks, and I was going to do everything that I could to protect them from everything that I went through. If somebody got a little too close to them, it would trigger those things. If somebody was a little affectionate, not meaning anything by it, but again, it was like, hey, back off, because of those things that happened.
Yeah.
Did those feelings ever surface for you with your kids?
I'm sure they have. I'm sure, because they can't, they're a part of my story. I like to think of myself as kind of the dam, if you would. I grew up dysfunctional. I grew up with brokenness. My family and the generations behind me all grew up, again, a lot of dysfunction, a lot of hurts and pains. And I like to think of myself as the last generation. I'm trying to pass on to my children to have the more stable, not perfect. I'm far from perfect, but the most stable childhood. They don't understand when I talk like this. And that's the best compliment to me. They don't understand the things I've endured. They don't understand the pain I went through. And I don't want them to, They have to endure their own stuff, their own junk, their own valleys and mountaintops. But hopefully this is not one of them. So when I talk to you like this and my kids hear it, it's kind of like they know it in theory. Thank God they don't know it in practice.
Yeah.
When my son was born, and I talk about this in the book, when my son was born, obviously I became a father for the first time, and I'm holding in my arms, and I can't believe how much I love this person, that I'd give everything up for this person, this baby. And the enemy, as we mentioned earlier, spoke into my ear, if you would. And he said, no one ever loved you like this.
Wow.
And I started to weep. And I started to think, why didn't anybody ever love me? And then the Spirit of the Lord, the love of God, just spoke to me again and said, but I always loved you. And I've given you life, and life more abundant. And even though you've been through stuff, you're going to try to be the best dad I am. So I'm very conscious of how I am as a father.
Yeah.
I'm probably I'm the easy guy. My wife is the hammer. My wife. I'm Grace. She's Law.
That's right. That's right. Yeah. Your wife gets to be the heavy. Yeah, I understand. Yeah. I get it.
Well,
Mark, I would be remiss. And thank you for being so transparent, by the way.
sure.
And folks, you need to get a copy of this book, Forgiving the Nightmare. Mark, I want you to share with me and this audience your biggest piece of intentional encouragement.
Trust the Lord. Trust the Lord. It's going to be the hardest. It's going to be the most difficult. It's going to be the best and most beautiful thing you can ever do is trust the Lord. It's not easy. Forgiving the Nightmare is a journey with lots of hills and valleys, ups and downs, weeps and joys. It will kick your can. It will make you celebrate. You have to die to self, but trust the Lord. Trust the Lord.
Well, the Bible tells us, it's Psalm 37:5. Trust in the Lord with all thine heart and lean not unto thine own understanding, and in all thy ways acknowledge him, and he shall direct thy paths. And listen, if there's anybody out there that has walked through, maybe you had an abusive situation growing up. You've never been able to quite put it behind you. One, get a copy of Mark's book, Forgiving the Nightmare. But two, start to trust in the one that has always loved you from the moment. And you might say, Brian, well, if the Lord always loved me, why would he let me go through that? Maybe it's because to help you later in life, to help you help somebody else. And maybe that's why Mark Sowersby, my guest, has had to walk through that so that he can help somebody else in life. Mark, share with the audience how they can connect with you, get the book. What are some ways that people can connect with you?
Well, I do have a website called forgivingthenightmare.com, forgivingthenightmare.com. People can go there. Also, I'm on Facebook at Forgiving the Nightmare. So you can find us on Facebook. You can find us on the website. And also, if you're interested in buying a book, you can find it at Amazon. Just put Forgiving the Nightmare on Amazon Books, and you'll find it there. You can order it right off Amazon. So that's the kind of best three ways to get a hold of us and check us out is through Amazon, Forgiving the Nightmare, and our website, forgivingthenightmare.com.
Man, this has been so good. Mark Sowersby, what an honor it's been to allow us to tell your story. And man, I'm so grateful for the conversation. I've enjoyed the conversation. Thank you for being so transparent. Thank you for sharing your story. Thank you for letting people use what your experience, hopefully to get some encouragement and some help. And I so appreciate you joining me on the Intentional Encourager podcast.
My thanks as always to producer Bryce Sexton and technical advisor Matt Means. And of course, the ultimate thanks goes to the Lord Jesus Christ, who provides intentional encouragement every day through his word. If you're not subscribed to the Intentional Encourager podcast, hit the subscribe button wherever you get podcasts so you don't miss an exciting episode where you can get encouraged and stay encouraged. And remember, anyone, anywhere, at any time, any place can be an intentional encourager.